Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican Book Review. It's another part of The Machiavellian Moment by J.G.A. Pocock. Today we'll be discussing chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12. So, chapter 9 is really good. We're getting into Gionati and Contarini. So, Gionati is very important because he lived through all the Florentine republics. So he's got quite the first-hand perspective. In this chapter, we talk about the citizen militia and the Grand Council, its composition and its authority. Now, the Grand Council, Gionati goes back and forth on how aristocratic it should be. Should it be like Venice, where after the great separation, the cutoff, they are, you have to be born into it. Now, Gionati doesn't really agree with that. He thinks that that it should be a little bit more open. And he gets, his opinion, but his opinion on the radical side does go back and forth. Should it be all those who are able to pay taxes? Or should it be all those who are just not poverty stricken? Okay, so the idea of citizenship here and the ability to not be dominated is what he's thinking about. And so it goes back to classical Republican non-domination. Now, what he also talks about is the authority of the Grand Council. Now, should it only have the power to elect people to magistracies or to other deliberating bodies? Or should they have the power to make war and peace and make laws and hear appeals? Now let's talk about all of these. So if they're only there to elect, they don't have to meet as often. If they are only the and also the question when it comes to election, are they electing from among the oligarchy, or are they electing from also amongst themselves? So if it is wide open, should they be able to have the ability to get elected out of the Grand Council into higher office? Now, when we talk about war and peace, we're talking about just the big issue of, is Florence going to be able to go into a state of war with country A or nation B? And then when it's time to finish, are they going to accept those terms of the peace? So they have no ability to direct the war. That would be up to either a more aristocratic body like the Senate, or they, like in Venice, they give it over to the Proveditore, who's really just a mercenary. Or do they give it over to the Gonfaloniere, or the, some other body that's specifically, in this, we're talking about Florence. So this is a body that they had, the Council of War. The ability to make laws. So the ability to make laws means the ability to approve laws. So they have the final say on laws. So some more august body like the Senate or another council would be able to propose laws, but they would not have the final say. The Grand Council would be able to make the final say and say, that sounds good. I like that law. Let's do it. But they don't have the ability to amend or change the laws. But I suppose if you're in one of these smaller city states, it's easier to just shoot it down if you don't like it. And maybe if there's there's not really debate, but maybe you can talk to the people, or the people who wanted to pass that law will talk to the members of the Grand Council and ask them What did you not like about that? And then they can revise it and bring it back to the Grand Council. And then the last one here, appeals. So having some judicial authority. So we have elect, war and peace, laws, and appeals. So and let's go on to another topic, was the militia. So Giannotti believed that military service makes men equal. And when it comes to the idea of maintaining the republic or expanding the republic, he fell on the side of not expansion, but just trying to keep the country stable. Now we go to Contarini, and I'll just mention him concerning the militia. He felt that you didn't have to. Again, he's a Venetian. You didn't have to have military service, and virtue rather than expansion was the necessary goal. Now, Contarini was he was a Venetian diplomat and a cardinal, and so he wrote about Venice, and he was quite an influential. Oh, you can go and see my video on Contarini and the Venetian regime and learn more about him, his life, and what he wrote. But Contarini, as outlined in the Machiavellian moment, believed that virtue provides the maintenance of a balance between the one, the few, and the many. And all three are subject to law and reason equally. The one, the few, and the many are categories based on theory, and in practice, all social groups must be satisfied. Okay, and I think I've pointed this out before that the one, the few, the many come from Aristotle, and they are, they're not always applicable to every state. Yeah, but what it does mean is that in a city-state, you are going to have different groups, different factions, and in a republic, they all need to come together for the common good. One should not dominate another. Now on to chapter 10, and they talk about models of civic consciousness before the English Civil War. And now this chapter there's not really a lot of republicanism in it. It's really there to talk about, to give you context of what's going on in England before the Civil War. And so, really there's not a lot of talk about republicanism before the Civil War. And that's partially why during the Civil War, they don't even use the word republicanism very much. They use the word commonwealth. Now, begins with the question, how do you apply a philosophy that values concepts of the polis and the citizen when you don't exactly have matching concepts in England? You have values like king and subject and the obedience between those. There is a lack of political and civic consciousness at this time in England, and these political ideas are developing secular institutions alongside the development with Protestantism. But ideas of Chiliasm and antinomianism are helping to shape these ideas. And it also talks about descending, authority and ascending authority. So authority coming down from the king and ascending authority, which doesn't really exist at this time, going up from the people. In chapter 11, the mixed regime leaps onto the stage of England during the reign of Charles I. Okay, this is the Stuart dynasty. You have James I, and then you have Charles I. Spoiler alert, Charles is the one who loses his head. But Charles actually uses the mixed regime to justify the monarchy, his monarchy. Okay, so not a lot of talk of a mixed regime before that, and then he's the one who brings it up to say, yeah, we need a monarchy because that's one part of the mixed regime. Then, when the Civil War begins, people realize that they need to come up with better theory to oppose Charles, and so they start. Other people, his opponents, start thinking of the mixed regime on how they can oppose Charles. So we see the attempt of putting theory into practice with the Putney debates. But of course, that only lasts a few days and never really gets put into practice. And the application of the citizen army and ideas of property and expanding the franchise. At the end of chapter 11, we read about Harrington and get to see Oceana in context. So if you haven't read Oceana, you can listen to my audiobook, which is on my channel. Go search under playlists. Pocock points out that Oceana is an attempt to reconcile the philosophical debate of classical republicanism between Venice and Rome. So Venice and Rome, of course, one is the idea of expansion, and the other is the idea of maintenance and stability. So I want to share this quote from 393 of the, it says, like Machiavelli's Philo-Venetian critics, he argued that civil strife at Rome was the result not of plebeian turbulency, but of the patricians' hereditary monopoly of office, which was casually unrelated to the arming of the people. Venice had solved this problem by making her aristocracy a body elected by and rotating among the many. And Machiavelli had been wrong in supposing that the disarmament of the people was the cause of her internal peace. Oceana, rising out of the wreck of the Gothic balance and the disappearance of its hereditary baronage, had an insular situation and a land-owning and arms-bearing people. She had only to adopt the rotatory aristocracy of the most serene republic, and she could be Venice and Rome in one. There need be no fear of an English Caesar. Okay, so that's towards the end of chapter 11. Great chapter. Chapter 12, it's called the Anglicanization of the Republic. So getting more into republicanism in England. Subtitle is Court, Country, and Standing Army Neo-Harringtonianism. So these are the topics. Court and country are kind of they're kind of separate from republicanism, but the Republicans are mostly on the countryside. And you have, of course, the standing army, whether you should have a full-time standing army or a militia, citizen militia. That's the question. And Neo-Harringtonianism is very different from Harringtonianism. So, some of the things are just put on their head. Henry Neville, who's a Neo-Harringtonian, he wrote Plato Redivivus, and I might do a video on that, so look out for that. And that's some later Harringtonianism, even though he may have, some scholars believe that he may have had some influence on Oceana. And so the Plato Redivivus is Harringtonianism for the restoration, during the restoration of the monarchy. So this is very important to Neo-Harringtonianism. And, it's kind of like how Plato, you had Platonism, but then you had Neoplatonism, which actually adopted a lot of the critique of Aristotle. So, it kind of turned some parts of Platonism on its head. But it became the dominant ideology during the Roman Empire. So it's a thing you have to deal with. So back to England. This is the time when we see a change from the three estates, the one, the few, the many, and, it's played out in the monarchy, the lords, and commons. And, well, king, lords, and commons is usually the expression. And it changes from these three estates to the separation of powers. So that's very important to the United States of America and many other modern republics. This chapter also talks about the Earl of Shaftesbury. That's very important in promoting republicanism at a time. I mean, he's a lord. This is during the Restoration, and he is trying to promote republicanism in that environment. So he has many scholars and writers around him who are trying to promote those ideas in an acceptable way. So the hot issues are standing army or marching army, meaning having an army that's just always around, or a marching army, which is basically a full-time, well, not a full-time, but a professional army that comes around when you need it. And then the status of the House of Lords, because, yeah, that's just a big question right there. And it's very interesting reading that in the early 21st century, reading about that, because, we've seen in the last 100 years complete decline in the power of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. So I might be doing another video on that sometime soon. So there you go. That's the review. This book is getting really good. Loving these chapters. Didn't love chapter 12 so much, but I mean, it was necessary context. So until next time, long live the Republic.